Coming up, Brian Dable and the New York Football Giants give injury updates, and it is more of the same, not only for Daniel Jones, but also for Andrew Thomas. Several players fall onto the IR. The Giants make moves, but they're not sexy and exciting ones. Is it enough to make the fan base think that this team has a path to continue to win football games? Plus, Thursday night pick'em. We all get it going coming up next. Yes, my friend, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz, and Andy, my good sir. You're healthy, you're wealthy, you're wise, but that's not the case for the New York Football Giants, who cannot seem to find a way to get their most important players back on the field.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Andrew Thomas still out. He returned to practice today. John Michael Schmitz still out, but he returned to practice today. No idea whether they're going to play. The sense around the building is that probably another week or so. But on top of the players that are actual starters, a bunch of guys that have been filling in and acting like starters or players that are contributing also got injured, also got sent to IR, which kicked off a whole flurry of roster moves for these New York Football Giants.
Yeah, we'll get into the additional moves that the Giants made, guys that officially went to IR, but just at the highest level, Andrew Thomas, you mentioned he's back at practice, but every time they get asked, it's just, I need to be able to make all the football moves. Fantastic. It doesn't change the fact this is a hamstring injury that can linger, and we know it can be a problem, but when you talk about taking on the New York Jets and that defense, you certainly would like to have your left tackle anchoring the line, whether it is going to be Daniel Jones or ultimately Tyrod Taylor again. And when it comes to Daniel Jones, Brian Dable has officially reached his breaking point with the media. They can ask it 16 ways from Sunday. They can ask Daniel Jones. It all comes down to when the doctor says he's good to go, he's good to go. But when will he ever be good to go?
Yeah, that's the real question. It's like, yeah, obviously you mentioned he got fed up and he was like, everyone's like, so what's the process? Like, what do we have to go through? I know he's practicing a little bit on a limited basis. He's got to see the doctor and the doctor has to say yes. You're like, okay, Brian, any Dabes, anything else you want to share? Like, do they have
No.
to like feel it? Is it a pain thresh tolerance thing? No, if the doctor says he's good, he's good. And on top of that, obviously with the Giants winning and Tyrod Taylor playing serviceably in that place and getting the W against the Commanders, they have basically asked him a whole host of different ways whether or not Daniel Jones continues to be the starter. And he said, I've been asked this too many times, so let's just be clear. When healthy, Daniel Jones is our starter. It seems like he's just kind of getting irritated with all of the Jones talk. And it's like, well, maybe if you gave us just a little bit more information on like when we think he's going to be back, you wouldn't be hearing the same questions every single Wednesday.
I have to assume that this, I don't want to read into it, but we know that Daniel Jones had the previous neck injury. And at the time, like they discussed that as being potentially career threatening. I have to assume that whatever type of precautions they're taking here has a direct one-to-one correlation around the idea of, because they keep talking about contact. That's what it's about, being able to take contact. He can stand there, he can throw the ball around, but I guess I don't even knock the training staff. I don't knock Brian Dable for being cagey about it. I don't knock the media for asking it over and over again because you want something that feels like you have more information around this. But I just think, like, to me, it feels like there's a world where right now, if Daniel Jones went out and played and he took a bad sack, it could be career threatening. It could maybe be even life threatening when we're talking about a neck. And at that point, when am I supposed to have a sense that he can play football again then? Because that just sounds like, I mean, we all remember David Wilson, right? Like, it just sounds like something where you're like, well, if not at some point, when will you feel comfortable about testing it? It just feels very much TBD right now.
You and I are in the same boat right now because I was going to ask you the question. Like, to me, it feels like either he is literally like on the precipice of playing
Right.
or he may not play for the rest of the season. Like
Yep. Yep.
that's the indications because if everything they're saying is true, you're exactly right. It's like, well, if he gets hit in the wrong way, like it could get worse. Like if that's the case, then they're going to hold him out for the rest of the season. Like when would that not be the case, right? And
Yep.
so for me, it's either like okay, it's a pain thing. They want to make sure it's all clear and they're being ultra conservative, and it could be this week or it could be next week. Or it feels like they're just kind of stringing this along and trying to see if it gets better. But to your point, if he needs contact in order to figure this out, like when is that going to happen if he's not even getting in practice yet?
Yeah, and we could speculate about whether or not the bye week, and that's a ways away for the Giants, but like, is that something they're thinking about? Just, hey, we'll take every single game we can. There are some good defenses that are going to be on the schedule here in the shorter timeline around Daniel Jones' return, but I don't know. So it feels very much wait and see. You hope that he's okay, and obviously we prefer that the franchise quarterback play for the New York Football Giants. In the meantime, it'll be Tyrod Taylor's job, and Dable said, yeah, he prepares each week, new defense, new scheme, professional, all those things that you expect him to say about your backup. The other thing then is the IR moves and the roster moves. How many would we get? Two or three guys ended up on IR for the Giants here before we get into the players they brought in. Some positives, trying to solve problems, but it's hard to do that when you're almost midway through a season. And a lot of the quality players, they're on rosters now.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Gray obviously had his
Yep.
challenges in the return game. He did not look confident. He also ended up injuring his calf against the Washington Commanders. He ended up going on IR. There was some speculation that Gary Brightwell was going to go on IR because he got hurt. As of now, he has not yet. But Eric Gray went on, and Matt Pert, uh, he was in the first 5 games of the season. He injured his shoulder against the Miami Dolphins. He's been inactive. He also goes on IR as well. So the Giants cleared 2 IR spots with those moves, and we're able to open up a couple of roster spots for other players, which we can go into.
Yeah, so the Giant, it's unfortunate for a guy like Gray. He's a rookie. He wasn't getting significant snaps, obviously. Saw a little bit of time when Barkley went down, but you had Breida there, you had Brightwell, then Brightwell gets hurt. So they make some moves here to try to shore up the running back spot. And they also, hey, why not make some moves to try to improve the return game after Eric Gray went down in the last week's contest? It was Sterling Shepard who stepped in there. We talked about it seems like maybe everyone was really apologetic for asking him to go out there and do it. But ultimately, they go pick up a player and that okay, explain the positives around the move that they made before we illustrate why it's hard to go out and find guys like this and why they should have just kept Jamison Crowder all along.
Yeah, so Gunner Olszewski was part of the Patriots. He was one of those Bill Belichick guys that's like, do your job, just be in here, be a punt returner, be successful. And in 2020, he was an all pro special teams player. So he
Yep.
has tremendous upside in terms of being able to do his job effectively. He's been with the Steelers. Steeler fans cringe every time his name is mentioned because he has not only fumbled the ball a handful of times this year, which the Giants have had challenges with, but he's also made some poor decisions in terms of fielding balls that could have gone out of bounds, lost yardage as a result, and overall just has not looked as confident as he did when he was a Pro Bowler in 2020.
Yep.
But Adam, the good news is this is his specialty. This is his forte. He is a punt return specialist. Like that is his primary job. And I think I read somewhere, and I don't want to butcher all of the data points, but he's averaged something like 12 yards per punt return, which is significant considering the Giants have been averaging about 4.5, almost 5 yards per punt return. So, but his issue is been fumbling the ball as well, and that's why he ultimately got released by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's a good thing that this is his only primary job. It's a bad thing that this was his job for the Steelers and he wasn't doing it effectively this year. But that just kind of shows how desperate the Giants are to get someone in that actually can do it.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I mean, listen, he has experience, so you like that aspect of it. You bring up the concern now. So you bring this guy in, you think he's going to be better, but we just watched guys fumble the ball over the field a week ago. So are we guaranteed that that's a safeguard? If he can hang on to it, then you think, hey, it can actually be a real asset here. It does make me wonder though. You're going to tell me in the entire landscape of like undrafted free agents, undrafted rookies, like there's a whole pool of players out there. This is the guy this is the guy that you go to get to bring in to solve this problem. We always talk about young players, veteran players, experienced players. Again, you had Jamison Crowder in the building. You made an active choice not to carry him over through to this roster, and this just feels like this is what you get. This is what you get when you maybe make listen, a lot of players, limited room, we get all that stuff. But when you start to go through the laundry list, whether it's injuries to Matt Peart, his lack of playing time, even though he was carried over as a swing tackle, all of these things, you drop it into the bucket and we find the Giants bringing either players in to replace guys that they already had filled or returning a Tyree Phillips, or let's turn our attention to the running back room, bringing back Jashuan Corbin off of the practice squad here so that he can maybe help out if they need him, knowing that you have some injuries there as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was thinking the same thing, Adam, where it's like it feels like over the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of like hand up, my bad. Like that,
Yeah.
I think we maybe like made the wrong move. It's like in camp, we decided Eric Gray could be multifaceted. Like he can be a backup running back and he can return punts. So Jamison Crowder's expendable. Oh wait, my bad. That didn't work out according to plan. Let's go get Gunner Olszewski. Like we got to do something about it. That feels like an admission that they probably should have Jamison Crowder after he was named special teamer of the week. And then you talk about Tyree Phillips coming back. It's like we thought Matt Pert was going to be the swing tackle. Hand up. My bad. Didn't look like that worked out too well, considering we brought back Tyree Phillips. And guess what? He looked decent last week against the Commanders. Like he actually was one of the better players. You know, I think he gave up one sack to Chase Young, but overall, we'll take one sack at this point. And the last piece of it is we thought Jashuan Corbin had an opportunity to maybe make this roster over someone like Gary Brightwell.
Yep.
Thought that he, the way that he runs the ball would have been an interesting dynamic for this offense. Eric Gray goes on IR. Gary Brightwell dinged up with a hamstring hamstring injury. All of a sudden, it's like, my bad. Yeah, Jashuan Corbin maybe should be involved here. It feels like three players that we made mistakes on over the first couple of weeks. At least Joe Schoen is admitting it and trying to address it at this point.
Yeah, and the one other player, obviously Matt Breida in that room there. I will at least give this tip of the cap to the organization. You chose to keep him around. In the Miami game, he had 9 carries. In the Seattle game, he had 14 carries. He's had some targets, right? 8 targets across Seattle and San Francisco games. It hasn't been great, though the game against Seattle was the most notable, where he ended up giving you 78 yards of all-purpose yards, from the line of scrimmage. Like, okay, so you chose that you were going to go forward with him. I can accept that, right? I disagreed with it. This is one of the reasons why we thought Corbin should be a part of this roster. But here we are. It'll be interesting to see if Corbin ever makes it off of the practice squad now going forward with the Giants. Gary Brightwell's health obviously will be chief among them there. And they also brought in Deon Jackson off the practice squad for Cleveland. Little note on him. We know who cares about Pro Football Focus, but why not mention he had 13 carries for 14 yards last year. It was a 28. It's a solid grade. I think he has some special teams value for the Giants as well. The other notable for me here in terms of additions, and then we'll get your note, is just on bringing in linebacker as well here. They went and brought in Justin Hollins, 28 years old, veteran. Now, he's played from Denver, the Rams. He's played with Green Bay most recently. I don't, again, not going to overstate it, but he at least makes sense to me because, again, when you go and look inside the linebacker room, you need more value here. Azeez Ojulari's been dealing with his injuries. Ward has been okay at times, but he's an older veteran. There's nobody else right now. Remember, Beavers, long gone from this roster. It's been Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden. They've played excellent in recent weeks, but you need to have some extra depth there as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Jashuan Corbin. He was signed off the Carolina Panthers practice squad. He was placed on the active roster.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah, so he is on the active roster. Deon Jackson was
You have to, right?
claimed by the Giants, so he is also on the active roster. So as of right now, the Giants have 5 running backs on the active roster. I would expect to see Gary Brightwell move to IR or be deactivated with his hamstring injury. But it is interesting that they kind of went from Eric Gray and Gary Brightwell to Jashuan Corbin and Deon Jackson in a 24-hour span.
And maybe Jackson then can end up on the practice squad because, to your point, if you're coming from the practice squad, you have to be signed to the active roster if you're going to make a move on someone else's team, right?
No, so the Giants put a waiver claim in for Deon Jackson, which
Yeah, that's what I mean. No,
immediately
no,
puts
yeah,
him
sorry.
on the active
Waiver claim for
roster.
Jackson. They brought and then they made the choice. Okay, because Corbin you have to bring to the active roster from someone else's practice squad, but they actually made the choice with Jackson. But well, why don't we go pessimistic? Maybe Saquon Barkley's not so healthy this week. I mean, like now we have everybody on this roster.
Well, to me it screams back end like for like. Eric Gray and Gary Brightwell
Yes,
look
yes.
like they're both injured, kind of backups. Jashuan Corbin, Deon Jackson, welcome to the show. We end up being 4 for 4. So be on the lookout for the Giants to make a decision on what they want to do with Gary Brightwell. I don't know if they can only put a certain amount of people on IR scheduled to return. So maybe they just have him out for
Wait
this
it
week
out.
and figure things
Yeah.
out from there. But a lot of things going on in that room. You mentioned Justin Hollins, obviously been around for a while. They haven't really been getting production outside of Kayvon Thibodeau from the outside linebacking position. You mentioned Azeez Ojulari's on IR. Boogie Basham hasn't really done much. Jihad Ward feels like a fill-in. They're just looking for anyone that can maybe get a little bit of pressure so that it's not all on Kayvon Thibodeau on the outside.
Before we get into talking about Thursday night football and our predictions there between you got the Buccaneers going up against the Bills. Giants played them a couple of weeks ago. The other little note here is just we said last week the Giants won this game. Obviously, they got themselves their second win of the season. Little bit of good vibes. And then the Minnesota Vikings went out and did this damn thing where they won a football game, an unexpected football game. And we had talked about how they're only the Giants a game and a half out of the final wild card spot. And while nothing dramatically changes, but the Vikings now insert themselves at the top of that edge with the Buccaneers right ahead of them, who we'll talk about on Thursday night. Do things like that, do moments like that, when you know the Giants are going to play the Rams, they're going to play the Commanders again, they'll play the Saints, they'll play the Packers. They play everybody except for the Vikings that are in front of them here in this pecking order. But when a game like that happens, isn't it the reminder that, like, when you try to paint this positive picture of the Giants still being able to make this interesting, you also have to paint a negative picture for every other team, right? Like, every other team has to keep struggling. Every other team has to come up short. And as soon as one of them doesn't, you go, oh, that's right. Put one more ahead of us. Cause I think we all would have said, oh, the Vikings are going to be sellers. Well, now they're 3-4 and they're one game below 500 and they're right there to be in that hunt to make the playoffs.
Yeah, you assume. I mean, it's tough because there are teams that the Giants are coming up against. The Giants are already a game or two behind them, and the
Right.
Viking schedule looks much, much easier. This was one of those where you look at the schedule and you say, "Oh yeah, that's a loss for the Vikings." Well, it ended up being a win. It could have been the same thing for the Giants last week against the Buffalo Bills when they
Mm-hmm.
had an opportunity to win that game where we could have stolen one. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the way that I look at this is pretty simple. The Giants have to win everything that they
That's right.
possibly can win on the way out and let the schedule sort itself out. Who knows? Kirk Cousins could go down tomorrow, and then all of a sudden the outlook on the team looks drastically different with no Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson for quite some time. So for me, the Giants have what we think are winnable games, aka within a touchdown either way,
Mm-hmm.
upcoming, especially against the Jets and the Raiders, where the Giants can really right the ship and look a little bit better than kind of when they were shell shocked and the offensive line couldn't do anything for this team.
Yeah, it's interesting because I brought this point up and somebody mentioned as well. It was like, well, hey, the Giants, they almost could have beaten the Bills. And if they had, they could be one better in the win column. And then these next few games look that much brighter, et cetera. But again, it was a loss. So you don't count these. The NFL doesn't care that you say, well, we had a chance. We almost had that touchdown at the end of the game. Why don't you give us the win? No, it doesn't work that way. And I did note that if you want the Giants to go on a run here, the Giants have an opponent record of 22-11 in their 5 losses. They lose to the good teams. That's what's happened so far to start this season. We know that you turn around and look at who they've played in only 2 games. You're talking about the Cardinals that have 1 win and the 3-win Washington Commanders. What's nice about it is 6 of the next 7 opponents for the Giants have a losing record combined 16 and 23, excuse me. And all of them have some level of QB play, whether it's poor, injuries, and backups are going to be inserted in there. There is a world where the Giants can win these games predicated on what we've seen from them to this point and predicated on the defense playing better football. Is there a thing, and we're not doing win-loss per se here, but I said, hey, if you include this last win for them, if they put together a 5-3 record over these 8 games, and that obviously is going to loop them back into the mix, then it starts to make things very exciting when you get down to those last 3 games of the year, the Philadelphia Eagles on Christmas Day. Isn't all we're begging for is that when you wake up on, let alone if they're playing a game on Christmas. I mean, can we stop it? Can I have a holiday just to enjoy myself? But you're going to wake up on that day and go, oh, the Giants, regardless of where Philly is, the Giants have a chance to win a division game and make this kind of interesting for the last few weeks of the year. Again, you're asking a lot. You're asking that these bad teams stay bad. But I do find it fascinating that their opponents, Jordan Love, shame on me. He has not looked like the guy that I thought he was going to be taking over for Aaron Rodgers there. Backups for the Raiders. The Jets have Zach Wilson. The Commanders we just played. New England Patriots, right? There's just so many teams getting listed here that I think you have to have at least a glimmer of optimism that this defense and solid offensive play could win them some football games.
You know what's interesting too, Adam, and as we start looking back and we're like, man, the Giants lost all these games. Like they lost all playoff teams last year, and they've lost to all teams that look like they're going to be playoff teams this year. Like
Yeah.
we thought the worst loss that they had was that Seattle Seahawks Monday Night Football game. It still looked bad because it felt like the Giants had an opportunity to win that. But Seattle looks
Mhm.
good. Like it looks like Seattle is going to make the playoffs again. And so when you look at the Giants' losses against Miami, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, like those are tough games that the Giants you know are up against playoff type competition. And Ultimately, you have to win some of those games in order to take yourself seriously as a playoff team, which is why the Buffalo Bills game hurts so much. But yeah, I mean, listen, the team is looking better overall. The defense looks awesome the last few weeks. If they're going to play like this, they're going to be in a lot of these games. If
Mhm.
the offensive line looks the way that they did against the Commanders, you're going to be in a lot of these games. And then all of a sudden it comes down to, can we make a couple of different plays? Can we not fumble punts? Can we make sure that we cash in on all these field goals? Can we keep the red zone percentage of touchdowns up? There's an opportunity for the Giants to look up and win 5 of the next 8 games. I know that sounds crazy, but you mentioned 5 and 3.
Yeah.
That is a realistic outcome for the Giants, especially given who their opponents are and if we're riding the ship at the right time.
And that we talking about a 7, and you have a 7-win record at that point. You'd have 8 losses at that point. You still wouldn't be sitting here really talking about saying, "Oh, watch out, we're running towards the playoffs." But you would at least bring this thing back to respectability. The one thing I'll note here, and this is where I have to acknowledge that I think the start of this season was like a real gut punch, right? Mostly just because not about wins or losses. The offense looks so putrid. The line looks so bad. It was like, what the heck were we being talked about? What were we being told here by the Giants organization this offseason? But when you come back down to earth, it was like, I want to see this team making progress. And there's still plenty of games to see this team making progress this year. It's looked different. It's taken far longer. And there's mistakes that I think clearly were made organizationally in how they constructed this team, but you feel like you can get there. The note that you had, though, the Giants lose to playoff teams. The Giants can beat non-playoff teams. That's where they are right now. They're not, a full-fledged lock me into the playoffs, and they're also maybe better than some of those bad squads. And we said this going back to last year. They have 6 wins going back to this Seattle game when they started that losing streak by and large last season. That includes the playoff win, right? That includes beating a couple of bad teams down the stretch there and losing to Seattle, to Dallas, to who was the other one they lost to last season late in the year? I don't want to lose track of it.
They lost to
The loss
Minnesota.
to Yeah, lost to Minnesota, who was going to be going to the playoffs. They lost to a team like Detroit, who is very good this year, right? So last season down the stretch, they lost to all the ascending teams. That's what happened, right? And the only way you can paint a bit of a positive picture is go, they beat Houston. They're a more competitive team this year. Now they have a new rookie quarterback, right? So that's where this team is. It's okay. I do just want to see them stay competitive and win some ball games. I'm going to be fascinated about taking on a team like the Jets, who we'll get into later this week, with their defense, because that's the real test for this offense that at best is still on shaky ground. We're going to get into that pretty heavy as the week closes out. But the other thing we're getting into, Andy, is our Thursday night predictions. When we go over here on FanDuel, and you can go ahead, I know you like to use your little aggregate scale there as well. As it currently stands, we're talking about a team, by the way, wouldn't you know it, in the lead wild card spot, or the final wild card spot, I should say. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Buffalo. Buffalo's laying 8.5 points here. They're minus 450 on the money line, over under 42.5. Where do you stand on this, Andy? Because Buffalo has not exactly been looking good from a football perspective the last couple of games.
Well, if you're a Giants fan, you want
Mhm.
Buffalo to win.
That's right.
You want them to give a loss to the Buccaneers, who may be in that wild card consideration. It also would help the Giants overall like strength of schedule because they played Buffalo and they lost to Buffalo. So it's a 2-for-1 in that regard. Here's what I will say.
Mm.
Everything points to like get back for the Buffalo Bills at home, but man, Thursday night football always just produces some weird things. Like strange things happen, fluky plays, fluky outcomes. It doesn't seem to make sense to me all of that much. And so when you're talking about a short week, a bunch of injuries on the Buffalo Bills defense, I don't know. Getting 8.5 points feels like the right side of things until Buffalo goes out and puts up 40 against the Buccaneers, right?
Yeah, that's the problem here, right? I mean, let alone the 8.5. I could make a strong case like, hey, take the points and take the Bucks and feel pretty good about it. You go back and look now at the regular season. The Bucks have lost to the Falcons, the Lions, and the Eagles. They've beaten the Saints, the Bears, and the Vikings. So again, like they're not on a totally dissimilar kind of expectation here. They're beating the bad teams. They're losing to a lot of the good teams. The real question here is Buffalo a good team or maybe a great
Right.
team? Are they going to be a great team eventually, but they're not a great team right now, so they could lose this? Dude, man, shock the world. I actually think, and I know we want the Bills to win this one. I think the Bucks win this thing outright, honestly. It doesn't feel like whatever the issues are that Buffalo is having, like they lost to the Patriots, man. And we said that like the near loss against the Giants was their wake up call. Well, it didn't wake them up, and so at some point, you just kind of are what your record is. They're hanging on above 500. It's a very competitive division in the AFC East right now. I'm going to say that the Bucs are a team who's surprised everybody already this season. Get them back above 500. It's going to make it harder for the Giants, but that's just where I think this game goes.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think you take the points on a short
Yeah.
week. Like I said before, it just feels like one of those where like something could happen. Obviously, they're down Matt Milano and their best cornerback
Yeah.
on defense. It just feels like the defense isn't really right. Josh Allen seems to be confused. They're putting a lot more pressure on him to make all of the plays. I don't know. 8.5 points just feels like a lot. Weird Thursday night game. I'll take the 8.5 as well, even though we're both kind of rooting for the Buffalo Bills in this one.
Yeah, in some ways, maybe we'll jinx them because I think we've been trying to pull the leg of the Giants in the right direction.
It's
So
a
maybe this is
win-win.
the kibosh. Yeah,
It's a
it's a win.
win-win,
It's a
right?
win-win. Everybody wins.
Either we're
Everybody
super
wins.
smart and everyone's like, "Wow, you took the Bucks getting 8.5," or we're like, reverse jinx. We wanted Buffalo to win the whole time, right?
Watch out for these guys. Just two sharp gentlemen talking about New York Football Giants. We will be back in, as we said, previewing this Jets game, talking about the offensive line. This is going to be the most difficult defensive test that the Giants have come up against here. But maybe most importantly, Wink Martindale. How does he look at Zach Wilson and say, this is the way we disrupt what you want to do? This is the way we take out Garrett Wilson from the equation. How do we find a way to make this probably one of the least sexy watches you've ever seen in NFL history? We'll give our predictions, we'll give our key matchups, and obviously do our pick 'em. All coming up as this week rolls on. Until next time, on social at One Giant Podcast, at Andy214, Andy Mac 214, at Adam Armbrecht, and One Giant Podcast on YouTube. Until next time, friends. As Andrew Mack was with what, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.